Good morning. I'm here today presenting as a member of the group Winnipeg Police Cause Harm, a volunteer community group committed to defunding the Winnipeg Police and the reallocation of its budget to life-sustaining services. The Environmental Scan report states that there are a number of proponents of the police abolishment movement, including defund police. This point of view does not include any plan for managing the calls for service from residents of Winnipeg that police must respond to. It is disappointing that some of the most highly paid public employees in the city consistently ignore clear public feedback for how residents would like to see our city be run. Nevertheless, I will bring you some of that feedback today so you can once again and unquestionably be made aware of the kinds of community safety abolitionists want to see, and so that these kinds of ideas can be included in the next budget and rounds of reports. I understand that not all these ideas are within the police board's power, but with Mayor Gillingham present, I'm confident that he will be able to bring up these ideas to the people with the proper authority. The Environmental Scan report does not specify what kinds of calls police must respond to, so I'll have to make some assumptions on what these kinds of calls are. The most common type of call is check well-being, making up nearly 10% of all dispatched events. The alternative response to Citizens in a Crisis program, while a step in the right direction, falls far short of what residents are asking for. As the Police Accountability Coalition, a group representing more than 90 community organizations, stated when the ARC pilot project began, there needs to be a mental health crisis response unit that is completely independent of police. Police's main tool is violence, and violence is never helpful to someone experiencing a mental health crisis. It also seems highly limiting that the ARC pilot project does not operate on weekends, when there are an average 2,000 more citizen-generated dispatch events each day. Police should not be called to help people in mental distress. There are many accounts of police actually causing harm or death when responding to mental health crises. They more often than not bring an aggressive and combative response and have the ultimate power to kill someone if they feel it is necessary. It is never necessary. Even if mental health professionals are present, police mere presence can escalate the situation. The Q3 business plan details an individual who made many calls for service, up to 20 in 1 month. The individual was connected with supports, helped to make a plan for meeting their needs, and calls for service subsequently dropped. One wonders why police needed to be involved at all, when clearly this person needed help meeting their needs and not to be confronted by police when they were in crisis. A task force dedicated to this type of work that did not involve police and their exorbitant salaries to do the same work cheaper, more regularly, and without threatening people with potential violence that police bring. Since you are looking for specifics, I would suggest laying off 100 police officers to hire as many trauma-informed crisis response workers to a task force not connected to police. The roughly $10 million in salaries that would be saved through layoffs would help fund the task force. This would be a more effective way to help people in mental distress and improve the collective mental well-being of our city, instead of just slapping a band-aid on it over and over. Secondly, I will talk about traffic enforcement, another area typically thought of as the exclusive realm of police. I brought my concerns to the board about the photo radar revenues a couple years ago and had a lengthy one-on-one conversation with Councillor Chambers. Traffic enforcement is often cited as a revenue shortfall in budget reports, which essentially means the police are counting on people to speed, causing danger, injury, and death in order to keep their books balanced. I'll also note that part of the reason for revenue from traditional enforcement being down is a significant increase in the number of fatal accidents and investigations, essentially saying that our roads are too dangerous for police to spend time ticketing people. Out of the more than 900 legally eligible locations for enforcement, about 70% of tickets are issued between only 15 locations. Despite this, the city has taken little action to actually improve safety at these locations. When enforcement is the city's primary road safety strategy and also relied upon as a notable source of revenue, it gives the appearance that the WPS and the city overall are not interested in improving road safety. Traffic enforcement should work to make itself unnecessary by putting the funds collected from fines into infrastructure that encourages people to drive slower and reduce the number of cars on our roads. The photo radar program should be treated as a means to an end so that we won't need these punitive measures because we will have adequately invested in and addressed the current gaps that exist in road safety. This solution has been called for by several other councillors and community groups and creates long-term safety on our roads. The revenue from traditional enforcement is on average 25% of the revenue from photo enforcement and at a far greater upfront cost due to the WPS's extremely high salaries. Traditional enforcement is also highly discretionary and can result in racial profiling and incidents that escalate to violence, causing harm or death. Traditional enforcement should be eliminated altogether in favor of automated photo radar enforcements that redirects revenues into reducing speeding in a given area. Lastly, I'll speak on safe consumption sites, which help address several situations from which police are often called upon. There's overwhelming evidence that safe consumption sites save lives, as shown in a letter from more than 80 community organizations calling on all levels of government to address the crisis of toxic drugs and overdoses. In June 2021, then Deputy CAO of the city, Michael Jack, said that the city has the authority to open safe consumption sites without provincial approval. The main barrier is funding. SCSs not only save lives by allowing people to test substances or provide intervention in the case of overdoses, it reduces the strain on our healthcare system and provides opportunities to connect people with supplies and resources that help prevent crime better than police ever could. A study published earlier this year in Harm Reduction Journal estimated the annual cost of an SCS at around $3 million, but also noted that there were at least $1 million in savings produced by moving overdose response somewhere equipped to handle them. To be specific, I would say the WPS budget should be reduced by $6 million, roughly 2%, to fund the operation of 2 SCSs. This would literally save lives and help people in poverty and dealing with addiction from turning to crime to try to meet their basic needs. I am aware that yesterday's $4.25 million over expenditure authorization explicitly stated that any options to reduce costs that have a detrimental impact on service delivery were deemed not feasible and therefore not presented as a contingency plan. It is clear, though, that a 28% clearance rate for a $324 million bill is not a good return on investment, and that services being provided by police are not as vital as we are constantly told they are, since they literally do nothing for 2/3 of the incidents they are called to respond to. In fact, the Environment Report itself states that it is largely felt that the cost of policing is not sustainable in its present form. Yet the police are consistently granted over expenditure authorizations. What percentage of our tax dollars going towards policing will allow them to provide the level of service and safety that they claim they can bring? Or is it perhaps, as shown by ARC and domestic violence intervention projects, the police simply shouldn't be doing some of the jobs they have been tasked with, and their budget should be reduced accordingly to adequately fund real responses? It should not be the job of volunteer community members to come up with detailed plans for how to solve our city's problems. This is why we pay taxes to pay your generous salaries. It is your job to listen to the outcomes that residents want and to figure out the best way to get those outcomes. So far, the only solution council can seem to fathom is giving police money, and that isn't working. It's time to try something different. I've given you several options to consider, which I am not alone in supporting. We all want a safer, more vibrant, and healthier city, and the way to get there is a compassionate response that works to address root causes, not just giving the police more and more to reproduce the failed attempts of the past. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you for your presentation this morning. Are there any questions of board members? Go ahead.
Good morning, Daniel. Thank you very much for your presentation. I am not an expert by no means in the discussions that have been taking place by delegates today. So I always take that opportunity to listen and learn, and I will take back and reflect what I've heard today, what was presented, to take value in some of those comments and see how we can strengthen the work we do at the police board. So thank you for coming here today. You had mentioned in your dialogue about laying off 100 police officers. So from that, I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, where do you feel 100 officers can be cut from? Would it be domestic violence, child exploitation, homicides, guns and gang? Where do you feel there are 100 bodies that we could remove from the resources that are needed in our city and our province? Where do you feel? What's your opinion on that?
I'm not being paid to do that work, so I would, unless you're gonna start cutting me a check, I would like the people who are being paid to do that work to actually do those see where the fat can be cut. I'm doing this on my own free time. I'm actually losing money right now, so I would like the people who are paid to do that investigation. I've already done more than enough work to try and figure this out for you.
Well, thank you very much for that comment. I'm sort of simply asking your opinion, so that,
My opinion is that the people who are being paid six figures to do this work should listen to what we're asking for and figure it out.
Thank you.
Daniel, just a quick question with regards to the photo radar program. You're aware that the program is actually a legislative program by the provincial government, correct?
I am aware, and I am in favor of photo radar. What I am in favor of is using those funds to actually improve road safety. So the program can continue indefinitely, but what it should be doing is working to make itself unnecessary, even if it must continue by legislation. I mean, legislation can change, so if one day it seems like, oh, we're not handing out any tickets, then maybe that legislation will change. The program itself is not a bad program. Absolutely, we should not be allowing people to speed, and there should be consequences for that. But what should happen is those funds should not just go into the police slush fund. They should be going into improving infrastructure so that people are encouraged to not speed or encouraged to not drive at all.
So I concur in your comment with respect to that it's a viable program, but it's also a program that is using technology that was operationalized in 2002. If you look at your cell phone and think back to what your cell phone was like in 2002, you'll recognize that there's lots of functionality of that 2002 cell phone that doesn't exist in today's market. So again, we're utilizing equipment and a legislation that's over 20 years old. Plus, added to that, this is a program that, as far as the intersection cameras go, they're stationary. They've been in the same location for the last 20 years, haven't moved. As a matter of fact, there's one location where an individual drove through the technology. It came down and it hasn't been replaced. So again, less revenue there. So again, in terms of the photo enforcement program, whether it's us as city councillors or the service, has been advocating to the provincial government to update the legislation to make it a more viable program, to ensure that, again, from a safety perspective, people are much more cautious in terms of driving through these intersections or driving through construction zones or school zones to ensure that pedestrians and cyclists are safe.
But do you understand that those improvements will come from infrastructure improvements, not from more fines or better technology? Also, most of the photo radar cameras are actually in vans and trucks parked at the side of the road. Are you aware of that? Because that's most of them that I see. So those are definitely mobile, unless those vans are not operational.
But the vans that are at construction zones, there's certain parameters by which they can do that work safely, and that's not set by police. That's set by Public Works and Manitoba Infrastructure. So
yes, and as I said, of 900 locations, most tickets are collected at 15 locations. That's for the vans, not for the cameras. There's not 900 cameras. There's 900. So those vans should be moved to places that are problem areas, and then those funds should be. It shouldn't be just treated as a cash cow. It should be treated as a way to get money to improve the infrastructure.
And again, it's not a cash cow if people are being responsible for their driving, reducing the amount of infractions that are being issued out. So,
but see, you do this with so many things, Councillor Chambers. You put it on to personal responsibility when actually you have a responsibility.
I have responsibility because being a motorist is not a right. It's a privilege. You have to.
I agree.
Your driver's license. So
I agree, Councillor Chambers. But what the city has a responsibility to do is to actually work with what works for people, and it's clear that just fining people is not enough. We actually need to improve the infrastructure. We need to make it so that the areas documented ways. I talked to you
A
about
lot
this
of
in
the
my
time
conversation
that
with you.
construction
Councillor
takes
Chambers, can
place-
I finish speaking, please?
A lot
I
of the
talked to
time
this
that-
about you in my one-on-one conversation and my presentation from years ago. You can pull up the YouTube video of that. It's on YouTube. I cited some studies where it showed documented ways to improve infrastructure, improve the environment so that people didn't want to speed, and also so that people wouldn't drive at all, because we need to move away from a car-centric model in our city. So it can't be just reduced to personal responsibility. The city needs to take responsibility for the ways that it is encouraging people to act by depriving them of an actual livable city.
But a lot of the times that, again, the vans are at construction sites, it's because they're doing street construction to improve the environment for motorists. So,
But they're not actually improving the environment. They're just making the same road less bumpy, and then it gets bumpy again in 2 years.
Okay.
We're on a 120-year replacement cycle for our roads. How is that improving anything when we all know everyone complains about potholes?
Our board
think-
member, Mayor Gillingham, has a question for you.
Just a matter of order. I think that the delegate was speaking on the environment for policing in Winnipeg. I think we've drifted from that. I would encourage, if we can, to get back to the item at hand.
Thank you. All right, thank you for your presentation this morning, Daniel, and the debate. Have a great weekend.
You too.